Good morning, I'm WaywornWyrm, and welcome to my channel. And welcome to The Stolen Land, Episode 11, The Barbarian's Cairn. The next 5 days passed without incident as the Volso Expedition continued to explore the rest of the plains around Oleg's trading post. On the 5th night, however, they were attacked. It was dark that night as Lucion was standing guard, but he saw the eyeshine of the creature as it slowly made its way toward their camp. He was able to rouse the others before the 8-foot-long thylacine attacked. Petra pulled out her short bow and fired at the creature, hitting it on one of its shoulders, scoring deep. Tiber, who had been unable to put on his armor, charged the beast with his shield and scimitar. The blade dug in as he brought it across the creature's body. Lucion, who was in his armor, followed Tiber and rushed the beast, slaying it with one mighty swing. With the creature slain, the expedition finally went back to sleep, and nothing else of note happened that night. The next morning, they headed back to Oleg's and spent the day resting. They sold the couple of pelts they had acquired to him and restocked on trail rations, taking from the large amount of credit he had given them. The next morning, they bid Oleg and Svetlana farewell and traveled back toward where they had left off. Lucian's goal was to finish mapping the plains that lay on the other side of the spit of the gnarl marches that they had left to explore before heading into the forest itself. One of his main reasons behind this was he figured that someday soon the Sword Lords would create a separate kingdom out of this area, and if the plains that marked the border of Brevoy and this theoretical new kingdom were well mapped, it would help prevent border disputes in the future as the two kingdoms potentially moved out of the close friendship they would have at their founding. The trip to the new area was uneventful, but it did take all day. The next 2 days were similarly uneventful, but the morning of the third day was punctuated by some excitement. They had come across a pair of boars who were none too happy to run into humans. One of the boars charged at Lucian, attempting to gore him, but he was able to move out of the way as he was pulling his sword out. The other boar charged Petra, looking to gore her, but she somersaulted over the creature. Pulling out her short swords, she attacked the boar that she had just leapt over, sinking one sword into its hind quarters, but unfortunately missing with her second sword. As the boar that had attacked Lucian swung around for another goring charge, he stepped neatly aside and slid his sword into its side before withdrawing and preparing for another charge. Umbria shot a magic missile at the boar attacking Petra, killing it. Tiber sliced at the boar that was still alive, but he missed. The boar then attempted to gore Lucian again, but he was able to dodge out of the way yet again. Petra attacked it from behind as it was focusing on Lucian and Tiber, missing with her main hand, but striking true with her second sword, although it was more of a graze than a solid hit. Lucian, tired of the fight, went to end it, and end it he did. The expedition spent the rest of the day carving up the boars, and they ate as well that night as they had at Oleg's. On the third day after the battle with the boars, they were mapping a blackberry patch when Lucian noticed a cairn almost completely hidden by the brambles. He called the group over. "Look there," he began, pointing at the cairn. "That is clearly man-made." Tiber nodded. "Yes, it is a cairn. The burial place of an important barbarian. Probably a member of the Tiger Lords, the barbarian faction that used to control this area centuries ago, and still hold a much smaller area not too far from here. We should dig him up. There might be something useful in there," Petra said, looking at the others for agreement. Tiber looked pained at the idea, and Lucion shook his head. I don't think we should do that. It's not good to desecrate the resting place of the dead. Then, to everyone's surprise, Umbria spoke up in support of Petra. There's a magical item in there, though. I'm not exactly sure what it is. Its aura is faint. Whatever it is, it's not very powerful, but it is an item that is not only magical, but it's been functioning since before this cairn was made. It might very well be worth checking out. Lucian looked at Tiber, knowing it was not a good idea, but maybe it was worth the risk? Tiber shrugged. If we're careful, then we can move the stones. Maybe we can build the cairn back up to how it was, and I can say some words over him, but they will not be the words that were spoken when he was buried, and who knows what will happen. Lucian looked back at the cairn, considering. On one hand, he wanted to respect the dead, especially since he knew that most of the cairns in this part of the world had been destroyed long ago and were looted. And here was one that had managed to escape that fate until possibly this day. On the other hand, his wizard was telling him there was magic to be had there. His expedition was very much lacking in the area of magic. Umbria had her spells, and a scroll, and a pouch with magic dust in it. Petra had a cold iron sickle, which would be helpful in a couple of very limited circumstances, but it wasn't really magical. There's one other thing to consider. When his expedition finished up and the Sword Lords named a new kingdom here, as he was sure they would, there was a question of who the king would be. He knew his expedition was one of 4 sent into the Stolen Lands. One of the groups was apparently made up of Brevik government agents, and the other 2 were mercenaries and seasoned adventurers. If he were to be named King of the Greenbelt, he would much rather the cairn be undisturbed. But if he was to be replaced, and the Sword Lords decide his group would be better off as just adventurers, undeserving of a kingdom, then he'd rather get whatever he could from this land and be done with it. Eventually, the promise of magic won out. He instructed Tiber and Petra to help him dig out the cairn, being extremely careful to disturb it as little as possible, and to be able to recreate the cairn as close to how it was before as they possibly could. Half an hour of back-breaking work later, they were looking at the remains of a relatively shallow grave that had a skeleton in it, in tattered and mostly decayed hide armor. On either side of the skeleton, corroded weapons, an axe on one side and a sword on the other. One side of the skull was bashed in, clearly showing what had killed him. The equipment made it clear that this was a very rich and powerful man in his time, in his rather primitive tribe. But most of it was worthless by now. Either decayed, or corroded past use, or just not very good in the first place. Or all of the above. But on one finger, there was a ring made of a green wood depicting an eel and a frog tangled up along the entirety of the ring. This ring showed no sign of age or decay and was clearly the magic item Umbria had detected. Umbria sat next to the grave and focused on the ring for several seconds before she said, "It's transmutation magic. Let me try and figure out what exactly this ring does." Another short while went by before she stood up with a smile. "It's a ring of swimming. It makes someone much better at swimming." Lucian nodded, and very carefully removed the ring from the skeleton's hand and put it upon his own finger. It was not what he had hoped for or really expected, but it was a magic item, and there were plenty of rivers and streams and lakes in the area. It would be helpful. He wasn't sure it was worth desecrating this burial site, however. Not that he'd ever say anything about it. Okay, let's rebury him, and Tiber, if you wouldn't mind saying words. And so they did. But this time, it took much longer to do, as they were just as careful, and Tiber prayed over the body. That night, Lucian spent his watch more on edge than usual. He was half expecting some sort of retribution to come visit them in the night. But nothing came. At least not on this night. Thank you so much for listening to episode 11 of The Stolen Lands. Tune in tomorrow for my normal weekly wrap-up. And make sure you tune in next Thursday for the next episode of The Stolen Land, as they finish up exploring the plains. Thank you.